Ben Franklin was an inventor. He's credited with inventing the Franklin stove and the lightning rod, and improving other inventions like the catheter. He was also a scientist, a statesman, a founding father of the United States, and a writer. It's Ben Franklin, the writer, that I want to talk about briefly today. He's known for several famous quotes. I'm sure you've heard of a few of them, like, "A penny saved is a penny earned." Now, he didn't say it exactly that way. In his almanac in 1758, he actually wrote, "A penny saved is a penny got." He's also credited with the saying, "Early to bed, early to rise, makes a man healthy, wealthy, and wise." And he's credited with, "Remember that time is money." But who could forget, dare I say it, his most famous quote, "In this world, nothing is certain except death and taxes." Death and taxes. Taxes and death. The central character in this week's scripture reading is familiar to us. I'm fairly certain we've all heard of Zacchaeus. Maybe we don't remember him by name. Instead, we remember him as the man who climbed a sycamore tree to have a better vantage point so he could see Jesus. Zacchaeus was a tax collector, and that role has been a prominent one in a few of our scripture readings over the last few months. And there's a reason for that. Tax collectors, as I've previously mentioned, well, they were the lowest of the low. And Jesus was sent to save the sinners. It's important to understand why tax collectors in Jesus' time had this reputation. Why were the tax collectors frequently referred to as sinners? Well, they weren't merely disliked. They were despised. They were reviled. I'm pretty sure that there weren't too many people who were hated more than the tax collectors. Some even referred to them as traitors. Zacchaeus wasn't just any old tax collector either. He was a chief tax collector. Tax collectors, or publicans as they were referred to by the Romans, collected taxes for the Roman Empire. General taxes like those on property and tax, and duty taxes on imports and exports. The tax collectors were Jewish, so the situation was this. Jews were collecting money from Jews, and the money, some of it anyway, was going to a foreign enemy, the Romans. The Roman Empire at the time was vast and occupied Israel, which meant the Jews were required to pay taxes to the Roman Empire, and they were required to pay Jewish tithes as well. Now, this caused a situation that grew increasingly dire. The peasants certainly weren't rich, but the burden of taxation caused, over time, many families to go into debt. Some of them even had to lose their family lands. Now, poverty and hunger, it became something that was familiar to the Jewish people because not paying the taxes, any form of disobedience, meant punishment. Of course, there was also the command in Romans chapter 13, verses 6 and 7. For the same reason you also pay taxes, for the authorities are God's agents, busy with this very thing. Pay to all what is due them. Taxes to whom taxes are due, revenue to whom revenue is due, respect to whom respect is due, honor to whom honor is due. So the tax collectors were Jews collecting money from Jews. They weren't just collecting money for the Roman Empire, however. It's not like each coin with Caesar's image on it was coming from Rome, finding its way into the pocket of a Jew, and then simply being given back to Caesar. Some of the coins, well, probably a lot of the coins, were being used to line the pockets of the tax collectors who were, like Zacchaeus, rich. That meant that being a tax collector, well, at least financially, it was a fairly good gig. Tax collectors had power and money when those around them had neither. Their place in heaven must be assured, right? Well, that's where the tax collectors got it wrong, because if they shared the same thinking as the Pharisees, well, as we learned last week, those who exalt themselves will be humbled. I think one of the things that's interesting about Zacchaeus is that he was short. He couldn't see over the crowds. What this meant is that despite his position, despite his power, despite all of his money, he couldn't get close to Jesus. We're told he couldn't see Jesus without climbing a tree. But it's just as plausible that he couldn't see Jesus because he was morally bankrupt. And yet, Jesus sees Zacchaeus. He not only sees him, but he calls out to him, "Zacchaeus, hurry and come down, for I must stay at your house today." It's no wonder the crowd, the throngs of people who were also there to see Jesus, grumbled. He has gone to be the guest of one who is a sinner. And what is Zacchaeus' response? He tells Jesus he will not only give half his possessions to the poor, but also, if he has defrauded anyone of anything, he will pay back 4 times the amount he defrauded them. Well, that's a telling statement if ever there was one. If he has defrauded anyone of anything. He won't just pay them back or pay them back double or triple the amount. He will pay them back quadruple the amount. The phrasing is interesting too. Something to think about. Was he promising to pay them back in the future? Is it reasonable to expect after the scene played itself out that he would keep his promise? I think we know why he says this. He was a tax collector. He was rich. He was standing among a crowd of Jews who likely had been taxed by him. What else was he going to say? It's my duty. I must collect the taxes. The natural response to a question like that one, it's my duty, I must collect the taxes. Okay, so you had to collect the taxes. Does that mean you are also required to defraud your fellow Jews? But instead of asking that question, what does Jesus do? He declares the sinner a son of Abraham, a child of God. He tells the crowd and Zacchaeus that salvation has come to this house, that the Son of Man, Jesus, came to seek out and to save the lost. That one sentence changes the meaning of the passage, doesn't it? It's possible to be a sinner and to still be a child of God. It's possible to be a sinner and still be loved by God. Is it Zacchaeus who is seeing Jesus, or Jesus who is seeing Zacchaeus? Maybe it's both. And still, the message is clear. The sinner, the one who has lost their way, who has done things that they shouldn't have, the one who is despised, that sinner can be saved. Now, that doesn't mean we can run around and, like Zacchaeus, commit fraud or engage in sinful conduct. We shouldn't just throw caution to the wind and believe that we can indiscriminately sin, ask for forgiveness, and then repeat the process. But what it does mean is that as sinners, we are not destined to only be sinners. Sin is not the sum of our existence. All those who seek out Jesus can see him, and Jesus will see all who seek him out. There is nothing, absolutely nothing, that God can't do. And there is nothing, absolutely nothing, that is impossible. God offers us salvation through the Son. We know this through the story of Zacchaeus and through Jesus, who said it best in Luke chapter 18, verse 27. What is impossible for mortals is possible for God.